Did you see it as well? I looked up Philip Hammond's wife's name.
What is his wife's name?
Susan.
Susan?
Which I'll talk about again in a second, I suppose. Okay, welcome back.
Welcome back.
Episode 7. And I think where we want to start is with a quite a significant follow-up section from our previous episode about office culture, discrimination, etc. that we talked about.
Yeah.
I messaged you the evening after maybe, and I was like, there's one big group of people that we forgot to mention, and that was people with disabilities.
Whoops.
Which, having listened to it back earlier to do the edit, we didn't even mention it once.
No.
It never came up.
No.
Which I feel quite bad about. Especially because we know somebody who has got a disability working at your the first place you worked.
Oh, yeah. Beep.
Oh yeah, I completely forgot about.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I don't know whether we need to rehash all the arguments, but I guess they all apply to people with disabilities as well. I haven't, apart from your friend, I don't know anybody else that I've worked with that have had a disability.
No, not as serious, but yeah, not something that would really. That's really like obvious. No.
Well, that hampers their.
Yeah.
How would you say that? Not hampers their job, but I don't know.
Again, I've only seen people with disabilities in the big first company I work for.
Yeah.
Not seen anybody with disabilities since.
No, that's what I was thinking as well. But yeah, so we should apologise for ignoring that big group of underrepresented people in software engineering.
Sorry about that.
But we did remember. Just not whilst we were recording. So, what else did I want to say? Oh, there was an interesting thing in Reddit today, actually, about on the mental health side that you were talking about.
Oh yeah.
And talking about how it's still not very well represented, not very well talked about, etc. And I saw that there was today I learned on Reddit, which was that in 1972, the Democratic vice presidential candidate Thomas Eagleton was forced to drop out of the race after he was humiliated by the revelation that he had been treated for chronic depression.
Yeah. Gosh, I did also see that. We're apparently in the same mind hive. Yeah, I saw that. That surprised me.
Which, considering we were talking about it in the last episode, I thought was particularly apt and almost unbelievable, really.
I read a fact that Norway or Finland, Norway's prime minister took 2 weeks off to deal with mental health issues, I think depression.
Right.
In near the year 2000. And it was in a quiz I was doing about mental health. And the answers were like all these different countries. And then one of them was a Scandinavian country. And I was like, it's probably going to be that one. Yeah. One of the answers was like Mexico. And I was like, can't imagine.
So I assume that was a big deal that they took 2 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, it's still like, that is still quite taboo. That was a while ago as well. 20 years ago nearly.
Yeah.
I'm getting old. But yeah, I guess in the 70s, that was a big taboo thing.
Yeah, I mean, to the point where he couldn't run or felt like he would never win because people would be judging him because he was treated for an illness that he had.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
It's crazy.
Yeah, that is weird.
Considering as well, like, in terms of, again, as we were saying, physical illness, was it Roosevelt or that basically couldn't walk? He
had polio.
Yeah, so he was paralysed, but there was like an unwritten agreement with the press that they would never take a picture of him like trying to get in and out of a car and stuff.
Get away with that now, would you?
Yeah, but then they didn't. They were like, well, we have to report the fact this guy's got depression, even if it was a similar.
Yeah, because times have changed.
I mean, that was even longer ago, but
that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, bizarre, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I thought that bizarre. Was an unbelievable article.
Yeah, that is surprising.
And my third piece of follow up actually is that Philip Hammond's wife isn't Philippa. Disappointingly,
what's her name?
Susan.
We're
just going to leave that.
Do we call female listeners Susan now or Philippa? I think Philippa.
Philippa. Well, we've got to stick with.
It has to be Philippa.
I was just disappointed that it wasn't Philippa. I did ask the question, so I thought I would at least do some research on that. Yeah, those are the three things about from me on follow up from the last episode. Yeah, sorry about not mentioning disability.
Sorry.
But I feel like it's the same. There's a lot of the same problems.
Yeah. Same.
What about on your side? I assume you've come heavily armed with some stats.
Well, I've tried to come heavily armed with some stats, and what I found is that stats for this stuff is really difficult to find.
Yeah.
So I have got some just random stats. One stat that I found out is that there are more Asian computer science graduates from Stanford than white graduates,
Okay.
which I thought was interesting.
Yep.
And I saw, we'll link everything, there's more. So in the US, programmers, white programmers is the highest proportion, then Asian, then black, then all the others. But what's not really clear in that data is what percentage of the US is white, Asian, and black in the first place. So presumably white is winning because they're just loads of white people in America. But we were saying before the show, although I don't think I have direct stats, but it feels like particularly in America, but maybe everywhere, black people are underrepresented.
Yeah.
It feels like.
Feels like, for me. I would agree with that.
Because it just seems... I was reading a Quora question where someone was like, why are there so few black computer programmers? And there were these people commenting like, I have 30 years experience at 20 years, 20 companies in Silicon Valley, and I've met two black programmers. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, because definitely in America there's a
Yeah.
percentage of black people must be
Quite high, I think, yeah.
Higher than the number of Asian people.
Yeah, like I don't know. We could probably find that out. God, these stats are pesky.
That's a census thing. That must be.
Yeah, we'd have to find out. But so yeah, I'm trying to think if there are any other stats. GitHub pull requests are less than 10% of them are done by women, which does not sounds about right. And I've seen different stats on what percentage of women are programmers. 25% was the highest I saw, which feels too high, to be honest, for me.
Yeah.
But maybe it includes other things related to programming or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, that I would say that's probably lower from my experience. Right.
Yeah.
What else? I think that's pretty much all I had on stats. The good stats were really hard to find for this, and it's frustrating.
So in the show notes for the last episode, there are a couple of there's at least one research article that we've linked, right, around people trying to do sort of, it's not even sort of in common knowledge, but it's initial research on the open source pull request stuff, right? So I feel like it's still in that stage where primary research is still going on to understand fully the problem. It's not even like just common parlance of, it's about 10 or 20%. It's very, very uncommon.
In their paper about pull requests on GitHub, they think that women's pull requests get accepted more than men's, not less, but that percentage changes to less if the other people know that it's a woman, which is quite interesting. So maybe the lesson is that women are more competent, diligent programmers unless men are reviewing their PRs and then reject them. I don't know, but there seems...
So that would imply some inherent bias there in the people reviewing, right? Because if they don't know, they're like, oh, this is a really good piece of work.
Yeah.
And then thinking that it's a woman, they're changing their judgment.
There was also a big Hacker News thing in 2012 from a woman who said that she'd done 5 or 6 PRs and none of them had got merged. But the article's quite well-rounded, and she said, everyone was polite and they sort of gave semi-decent reasons, but it's cited in the paper that we just mentioned as one of the things. And we looked at one of the things that influenced it. And we looked at all of her PRs very quickly. And I don't think either of us particularly disagreed with any of the merging or not. Some of them did get merged later, maybe. But
it was a difficult one. I mean, having skimmed her article, she seemed, like you said, it was quite well-rounded. She wasn't like screaming from the hilltops, this is unfair. But it's difficult, like you said, from us looking at them, they seemed reasonable to not be accepted. Maybe a couple, it looked like they just died, but you just don't know whether somebody hasn't linked the GitHub issues correctly. Like, they've closed them and you don't know if they then opened another one to do the thing that they actually wanted it to do. It's very hard to get to know exactly what's going on there.
But some of them that didn't get merged, like she changed in 2012, which is probably quite a jQuery year, she'd changed some of the documentation for PR to change some of the documentation for jQuery in quite a prominent place. And they were kind of like, they didn't say no, they just said they wanted her to move it to another place.
Yeah.
And then she didn't, and then it didn't get merged.
Well, as far as we know. That's what I mean. I think that's an example where I think maybe the linking between GitHub issues was the issue there.
Yeah.
Anything else on any more stats or thoughts or?
No, I felt Well, I felt my future career as a politician might have been hampered a little bit by last week's episode when I am running for Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I think I may regret some of the things that I said or didn't say. People with disabilities will obviously be gunning for me when they come back and listen to this podcast in 2035. So
maybe we'll have to take it down if you decide that politics is important.
If I go for a run, the big run. I was thinking, I don't think I'd want to be Prime Minister of the UK. Or I think I'd rather be Prime Minister of the Internet. But then I thought the Internet's the kind of thing that we'll ever have.
Would that be like running Reddit? CEO of Reddit, is that basically the fill-in job for that?
Sort of, yeah. Kind of. Reddit is feels like the nation of the Internet for me. But maybe there are other places.
4chan. God, that's a hot potato.
What else did we do? We also...
So we talked about Linus as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Linus Rants, again, was in the show notes. The Reddit subreddit that you mentioned. You had a look at the email that he wrote to the Linux kernel mailing list. Yeah. Any particular thoughts about what he thought? I reread it and thought he was uncharacteristically honest.
Yeah, it was really honest. Yeah.
And I think he was right to... It's clear that he was right to send that email, but I think it was a bit of a shock to everybody that he actually did it then of all times. But I don't... Again, he never says specifically why he's decided to do that, but hopefully for the better.
Yeah, I think he seemed... takes a lot of courage to be honest like that, especially for someone like him. I'm just trying to find if I can find any other good Linus quotes, but maybe we can do a section. Maybe we can do that at the end.
Yeah.
And then I'll have to fill in a lot of beeps.
Get that beep machine ready.
Get the beep machine ready, yeah. Hopefully you enjoyed our censorship beeps.
Yeah, in the previous episode.
Yeah, which, if for those of you that didn't know, if you're too young, is a modem dial-up sound. And I've picked my favourite point of the dial-up sound of a modem, which is what I call the boingy boings, where it goes boing, boing, boing. So
we'll add a link in the show notes to the full MP3 of a
royalty free.
Yeah, of a modem dial-up.
Yeah, we'll.
There was an Ars Technica article about the modem where I think it was Ars Technica, or there was an image somewhere, maybe on Hacker News, where they described each bit of the noise and why it makes that noise.
Oh, really?
To actually so it has the full wavelength of the entire noise and then split up into doing what each piece is doing. So if I can find that, I'll put that in the show notes as well. So you actually know the bit that you like, you can probably work out, it will probably tell you why that bit sounds like that.
Sounds like it does.
There'll be a reason for it.
I guess no one can fake that with their voice. Because there is a thing, right, where there's this thing before the internet was it called phone phreaking or something?
Which is, what's that again?
When last year when I was on holiday, we went to America and we went to breakfast we were staying in quite a small place, and these other people came down, and they were mainly sort of baby boomer generation, sort of, I don't know, between 50 and 60-year-old people, maybe a bit older, who had mainly retired. And it turns out that effectively 3 of us there were programmers, me and 2 of the others, but they were obviously a lot older than me.
Yeah.
And they were basically saying that one of the guys was saying that him and his wife met because they were in the military, and they were saying something like they all got into ham radios, and I was just sat there and it was fascinating because they were obviously really nerdy, but the stuff that I was into as a kid, which was dial-up internet and the internet, they didn't have that, so they were into all this
amateur radio stuff.
Yeah, and the guy was basically bragging that his wife could could write down Morse code. There's a technical term for all of this, but her words per minute in Morse code was something ridiculous. I think it was over 100. It was I think it was 120. I don't know.
What, translating Morse code into letters and then writing them down?
Yeah,
and hearing it in real time.
Yeah. I don't know if it's in letters or words, but basically this woman apparently was a mega at hearing Morse code and writing it down.
Wow.
So that's kind of cool. I've forgotten what were we talking about before. I've forgotten. The modem thing.
Yeah.
And they were talking about phone phreaking, which was where you could hack phone systems to
get long range calls for free.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, with that noise.
And they were saying that there are people, I don't know if they were saying they could do it, but there are people that could hack the phone system by squawking into the phone.
Yes, because there was a whistle that you got with some Frosties or something that could do that noise, is how they found it.
No way!
Yeah.
It's a kid's toy.
Yeah. So I think that's how it originally came about.
I didn't know that was a thing. That's awesome.
And then it was some particular frequency.
Wow.
And then that overrode the automated system to be like, oh, this is a long range call and it's been approved or something. But then I think, the second part of that was that people then tried to do it with tried to do it without the toy because they only sold the toy for a short period.
So you can like squawk, but I don't think you can do the boingy boings.
What? So just pick up the phone and pretend to do it. Try and ring your old dial-up carrier.
Try and be a 56k modem or whatever it was. You'd have to be pretty good. I've read a couple of things that that phone phreaking thing where you have to like squawk into the telephone. That a couple of blind people are really good at that.
Okay.
So trying to big up the disabilities now. So now after our last week's submissions.
Yeah.
But I've read that in the past. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Hang on.
Yeah, anything else for follow-up? We had to make a longer than usual, but that's mainly due to our screw-ups.
One correction is that the apple pie story actually came from my wife when I told her. She was like, I told you that. Cross with me, so I should raise that now.
And which one was it? Was it the eating as many until you feel unwell?
Yeah, so it's like there's no like, she was just, I'd forgotten a lot of the details. So basically they go to, I can't remember what it is. They get, maybe I'm getting the order wrong. They drink a carton of apple juice. Then they go to McDonald's to order 3 apple pies.
Yeah.
And then they have to try and get back to the office, to the toilet before all hell breaks loose, is the game. And I don't know what the reasoning or why the game happens.
So you drink a carton of apple juice, which is probably a litre of apple juice.
Yeah.
And you have to eat 3 apple pies from McDonald's.
There might be something else. Maybe an apple. I can't remember.
And then you've just got to hold on.
You've just got to try and make it back. But I don't know. Is apple a natural laxative? I don't know.
Is that the concern? I don't know.
I think it is.
Right. So if you have too much, it's trouble.
It's bad news. I've got a couple more. I actually wrote down... I've just got loads of things saying this facts and that facts. I don't have them. But another avenue to get into software dev is self-taught, which is actually pretty common because we were talking about that a little bit with
you training your guys up, right?
Yeah, and it solves the fact that university intakes can be not proportional to society, but self-taught programmers quite common. I've come across quite a few. I'm guessing you have too.
Yeah, well, not many actually. A couple of one of the guys I work with at my startup, he was a maths guy and he learned R and KDB for what he needed to do. But my current place, I think it's all a bit more traditional.
Guy that sits opposite me has a biology degree or something along those lines, and he's now a C++ programmer. And there's been I met a couple.
He made a wrong turn there. Somewhere.
Something went terribly wrong in his life. But I would say maybe it's quite common though. I've met a few, and I've met a couple that haven't been to university.
Yeah,
got one contractor I knew, and there's been a few. One with a philosophy degree I knew. But yeah, so that was another thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
Another thing that I thought about when I was reading was that you made a comment, which made me think when I was listening to it back, which was that if everybody's a frat boy and they're programmers, then they're thinking in similar ways.
Yeah. And
you were saying you think that's a good thing.
Well, it
can be a good thing. I've often heard that in terms of diversity at bigger companies, the thing they'll say is that it's bad if you have too much groupthink, and so you want people from different backgrounds to get
different perspectives.
But what it did make, and I've always kind of just accepted that as like, oh, okay, that must be true. But I must admit there was something nagging at the back of my mind thinking, actually, when you work in a team, the hardest bit about working in a team is one of the hardest bits is getting everybody on the same page in the first place. Because if you work on your own, you're definitely on the same page.
Yeah.
Because it's just you.
It's your page.
It's your page, yeah. It's one page and it's your page. But when you work with other people, you definitely have to, you've got to try and make people agree. So I would agree with you that superficially it sounds like being on the same page is actually quite a big win. But maybe it depends what you're doing. Maybe for some things involving things like governance, and maybe if you're doing the board of a company, a bit of diversity is no bad thing because a bunch of stale white males will say, no, we should definitely do this. Whereas if...
I think I was saying, primarily on the development side, using examples like Uber and some of those Silicon Valley things, I think potentially some of the reasons they were successful quickly or quicker perhaps is because they had that similar culture. I'm not saying I want to work in one of those cultures, but I feel like there must be a reason. I was hypothesizing, there must be a reason that there's a lot of them. A lot of them around, particularly in Silicon Valley. You must get something out of it, or else they wouldn't do it and they wouldn't be successful.
Yeah. No, I agree.
But yeah, I agree with you. My first place was the same. It was all, you're pushing diversity to get different views and different opinions and perspectives, which I think overall is a good thing. But potentially when you're, like you say, you're in a small team, you need to get, this thing done. You want people to sort of agree. You end up with that risk of spending a lot of time in meetings just discussing the thing rather than actually doing the thing.
It's going to affect decision speed, and sometimes, and it depends on the cost of those decisions. So if you make a bad decision and that's really bad, then maybe it would be much better to spend longer thinking about the decision. Having more points of view will be better. But if you just need to get some decisions made and build some software, it might be better to have people that are all more on the same page. But my one thing I would say about that is that I think it's more of I don't know what the words are, but cultural. So for example, if you have people coming in from different cultures, so maybe based on where they grew up and the way they think, I think that could lead to more viewpoints than say, like, I don't think race or gender just on their own are going to make that much difference compared to like if a bunch of people grew up in the same country and went through the same education system. I think that's
that's the bigger difference, I would imagine.
Yeah. It's going to be more different education systems, or perhaps even where they've worked in the past.
Yeah.
Like I'd imagine if you were working in an investment bank and you got a programmer in who'd been in open source, the way that they'd think about the world would be very different, and that would probably lead to different viewpoints, which could be good, but could also slow you down. So yeah. But that was just something that I thought.
That's a good point.
I hadn't thought about it like that before, so that was cool. I think that's it.
So this week we want to talk about requirements. Is that right?
That's right.
I'll let you start then.
So Michael Parkinson and I are going to be talking about requirements today.
This is where you realise I've been practising my Michael Parkinson impression for the last week.
He was Northern, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's from Yorkshire.
He's from Yorkshire.
So the other.
Did you technically grow up in Yorkshire?
No, Lancashire.
Lancashire.
Yeah. So I'm just going
cricket faux pas. That was sorry about that.
That's okay. So go on, requirements.
So requirements. So for people that don't know what requirements are, they're the specification, so they could be written down or maybe not, of what a piece of software should do and how it should work. And when I was at university, we did a bit on this, didn't we? Requirements stuff. It was there, and it was like really stodgy and like formalized. And I thought it was the most boring thing in the world. And I thought, this is a waste of time. As I'm getting more, like it's been a few years now, I've come to realise that this is a massively important topic.
Yes.
So maybe I should set out my stall as to why I think that.
Yes, you've explained what requirements are. I think it's pretty obvious why they're a good thing.
Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe not.
Why do people never give them to me? That's what I want to know.
So from a developer point of view, why do you like requirements?
Because then I know what I need to build.
Yeah.
And then I can build it and especially estimate and plan it better.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know what you're going to build, how on earth could you know how long it's going to take to build? I think the thing is with requirements, though, is I think there's quite a common, say, two developers coming in a podcast aimed at developers saying requirements are always rubbish. It's going to be a home run because everybody listening is thinking, why does no one ever give me good requirements? But what's ironic about it is I think actually to some degree, as a developer, if you're on the clock, it doesn't really matter if someone gives you requirements or not. Like you're going to get paid either way, right? It will just mean that the project will take longer because they'll say, I roughly want this, and they'll do some arm waving. You'll go away and start building that. Then they'll realise that that's not really what they wanted. They didn't think it through. There are loads of implications, and then you'll just have to sit there and get paid whilst you rebuild it all. Yeah. But that is still kind of frustrating based on the thing we talked about a few episodes ago. The amount of software you can look back on in a year that you've built will be less. Which for me, I find
the same thing written 4 times.
Yeah. Or 3 or 4 iterations of the same piece of software because someone didn't realise what was going to. I mean, sometimes it's impossible to get the requirements perfect.
That was what I was going to say. I think it's easy as a developer just to be like, why can't you give me this thing that will make my job easier?
Yeah.
But on the other side of that is actually getting a set of requirements that are to the point that a developer would be happy, it's actually very hard.
Yeah.
And I think there's a skill
Yes.
in giving good requirements.
Yes.
Investment banks that we've worked in have a job specifically for doing this, or maybe even two. At my first place, they had business analysts and then functional analysts.
Yeah.
So your business analyst, I think we did mention a business analyst last week, but they go to the business and say, right, what do you want? What's your problem? What can we solve with IT?
Yeah.
They get all of those requirements. The business objectives, I wouldn't necessarily say they're requirements because they're not requirements in the way you're talking about. The business wants to achieve these things with this piece of software. Then that goes to a functional analyst who translates those business objectives into what can, developer requirements, should we say.
Yeah. So you had two people?
Yeah, they had two different roles.
Oh,
which
I've only ever seen it as one.
Yeah, which I think the argument was that it's next to impossible to find people who are both experts in the business and experts in the technology to be able to give you that, understand the business and then also understand the technology, to be able to say, to give us a business problem A, we need to do all of these things.
Yeah.
So I think what they thought was, we'll split it out to a business expert and a technology expert, and then they have to interface. And then they've each got a bit of knowledge of the other one. But obviously that means there's an extra person in the way.
More people. Probably not good.
So in a big organisation, that's the way they tried to solve that problem, to be able to get better requirements to the developers.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the thing is, most businesses, whatever you call by the business, the people you're delivering the software to, they want to give you a one-liner of what the thing is that they want, and then they want you to come back and say it's going to take you this much time and cost them this much money.
Yeah.
But then it's that sort of friction between extracting as much information out of them, but then potentially them also getting frustrating that it's taking you a long time to even get started on the piece of software, right?
Yeah, some people... so I agree with a lot of the things you said. I definitely agree it's a skill. And I think, people do get frustrated. And they kind of think, well, hang on a minute, am I not just paying you to... sometimes it's just you that ends up doing this.
You're doing everything, right?
Yeah,
you're doing BA, functional analyst, and being the developer.
I think in general, it depends maybe on the size of the project and its difficulty, but there's definitely something to be said for having as fewer layers as you can get away with. That's probably just a rule for life, though.
Yeah.
Like human to human interaction is complicated and goes wrong.
Middle management is, the stereotype, right? Where you've just got lots of people in the way of you doing anything, which is bad.
Sometimes, it will be me, I'm freelancing on a project and I will speak to the business person and have a conversation about what it is they want to do, not in terms of tech. And then I'll just go away and translate that into... I'm going to build 5 APIs on this website and whatever. And I just do it all myself. That can have problems because you start thinking technically too early.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
Yeah, you're not really listening to what they're saying and thinking about the problems. That's tough.
But I think part of the problem, or I find part of the problem, is that it's difficult on the business side, the person that you're delivering the software to necessarily, they might not know really what they want.
Yes.
And then when you're trying to check, because at the end of one of the reasons for having requirements is that when you deliver your software is to be able to check off, does the software do all of the things they ask for?
Yeah.
And if they give you a very vague, high-level thing, it's impossible to ever say that this software does that thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So... But then they might not necessarily appreciate what's involved in delivering a piece of software that does, whatever it is. We should probably come up with an example. And so I think it's part of that conversation is to be able to. It's almost like an interview, right? You're going in being like, so what do you want, and trying to ask sort of open-ended questions to just see, try and get out of them what they're thinking, even because I think if you ask them direct questions they wouldn't necessarily know the answers, but you've got to sort of do that sort of, it's almost like a chat and a exploratory interview.
It's an exploration, isn't it? It's interesting though, because I think these people, the technical term is stakeholder is what people often call it, but the person who wants the project delivered and is often paying money for it, or in somewhere or another up the chain is paying money for it. They want it to go smoothly and they want it to do whatever it is that they want it to do, but normally because it's good for a business if you're working for like some for-profit. And so they should probably be the first people to realize that, like, if they get the requirements right, that's going to be good for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's quite rare that they are really on this, which is really strange. And I've had running my own agency where we built software for sort of smallish companies, and some of which were small startups and a lot of potential customers that hadn't really built software before. Oh boy, have I seen. I've seen things where it's like, I want an app which is sort of like Airbnb, but for this. How long will that take? And you're like, what? I don't know. No one could know. Like, how long is that going to take? And I'll see. But then on the other side, sometimes I'll see, they've got 30 screens of designs, and designs. I'm actually not particularly a stickler on the form of the requirements that much. I actually think that you can go too far. And I've worked in scenarios, if you ever get to a point where there's a document with headings where the headings are numbered, and then you're like in section 5.3 and you're thinking, I feel like
that's too far.
It's gone too far. Yeah. I kind of like something in the middle where it's just like common sense, and designs are a pretty good tool for that if you're building a UI. Yeah. And I think APIs, if you're building an API saying, I want a post HTTP request, and when you pass these things, it should return that. I'm actually really keen on examples for requirements. So being able to see...
Yeah, particularly for an API, like you said there, right? To be like, I want to be able to give you these things and I want this back out.
Yeah. And UIs, to be honest, like if you've got the same screen and it can look 4 different ways in 4 different scenarios, the ideal thing for me is, just have all 4 and be like, look, if there's an error, this is what that looks like. But the problem is that can get expensive depending on the number of permutations in the software. Yeah. Like if there's 30 different error cases and someone's designing 30 screens to show you what they all look like. But then again, if that is a genuine requirement, it's probably better that someone draws those out, or at least starts drawing them out and then thinks, gosh, this is complicated. This is probably going to take ages.
Or they... At that point of design, you're seeing that there could be potential problems with what they're trying to ask for, right?
Yeah.
Because they're saying, well, we want to do this thing. Like, okay, but then there are these 30 different errors that you might have to deal with.
Yeah.
And the business might go, well, why is that? Well, that's just the way, some other part of the system works. We can't get around that. So they go, oh, okay, well, maybe we don't need that then. Maybe we should do it a different way.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to say was Mrs. Jas works as a UX designer, and she finds, I think she would relate to a lot of what we're saying here based on what she said to me before, where she is going to the business almost as a BA, although there is a separate role, but she's basically saying, well, what you've got, you have these requirements. How do you want this? How do you want this to look? Or how do you want it to work? So then she can go away and think about how best to lay things out and display things. And what she finds is that during her design life cycle, they go through a lot of this what if, or it doesn't look right, or this isn't the way I want it to work. And what she ends up doing, particularly when she's at a big place like she is at the moment, she'll be like, well, these are the limitations we have, so this is the best we can do this way. And they'll be like, well, it's not acceptable for them. And they go, well, at that point, from where we are designing this piece of UX, this is as far as we can go. And it's up to the business then to escalate to the right people to get the other things done. But it's that sort of discovery phase of, we want it to do X. Okay, can we do that? Yeah. In a small company, I guess, like in a few of the places you've worked, I imagine it's just, well, we don't have anything, so we can build it as long as we can get hold of the data. But in bigger places with more legacy software, there are going to be a lot more limitations that the business won't be aware of necessarily.
Yeah.
Because they now want to do something in a different way.
Yeah.
And it's only at the point where you're trying to get those requirements and maybe do some wireframes to be like, this is how it's going to look, that the business realise or are made aware that what they want isn't that easy.
Yeah. I think as a UX, so UX stands for user experience, which is the best acronym ever, since experience doesn't actually start with an X, but there you go. But yeah, it's kind of like a UI designer, but it's not focused on the design. It's more sort of focused
workflow.
Workflow. So it's normally to do with UIs, but it will be like, what screens are there? Where do things go? And they're thinking about, does everything make sense? So it's kind of got like almost a psychological element to
Yes.
it, sort of thinking about how users will interpret things, whether they'll get confused. And it's quite a new field and still massively undervalued, in my opinion. So I think, and to be honest, I think most UX people, unless they work at a company where there's really strict division of labor, like maybe somewhere like Apple, where they're really on this stuff, I'd imagine, or Netflix, you might actually get to do pure UX if you went there. But I'd imagine in most places you end up doing a bit of business analysis, like BA, talking to people, gathering requirements, and you just kind of you'll end up being in charge of like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And then, it just kind of escalates.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's another interesting side to it in terms of getting or trying to work out what's actually technically feasible.
Yeah.
Because it's easy, you could argue it's easy to say, well, this is our list of requirements, but then somebody's got to go through and actually validate
that it's possible.
Those are possible.
Yeah, so the developer definitely needs to be involved with gathering the requirements. You can't just do it in a vacuum and not have a like the developer shouldn't necessarily be present when you're doing it, but once you've come up with something, you want to show it to a developer or like your lead developer who will say, because often it will be, sometimes it's not just like that's impossible. It's like that can be done, but if you make this slight concession, it might be a quarter of the time or something like that. So you can take shortcuts, and sometimes they'll say, no, that's a deal breaker. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, don't really care about that thing. And you've just saved a quarter of the time.
Yeah.
So I think, I think a lot of the reason why requirements are important for me is that development is still very slow. Unfortunately, it's it's faster than it's ever been, but still painfully slow. And the amount of software a senior developer, like if you're paying a developer, I mean, like a senior developer, let's say that costs $100,000 a year. It might be more, might be less, depending on where you are in the world, but it's quite a decent chunk of money. If you've got a few of those, you're getting towards kind of like $500,000 a year. And then you think about how much software can a senior developer produce in a year. It's not that much, actually, really. Like, can you build 4 apps and release them to the App Store in a year? No, probably not. Most developers, if you really get down to brass tacks, you could easily have a developer build an app and work on it all year, and it's still not really be finished. So it's kind of...
I think there it would depend on the environment they're in, right?
Yeah.
So a small startup, I guess if you somehow were suddenly well funded but were starting from the beginning,
you can go quicker.
You might be like, well, we've got nothing and we can... But again, that comes back to, we spoke about before, right? MVPs and making sacrifices there to keep that deployment time as short as possible. But, in a big organisation...
Yeah, it's even worse.
Yeah, you're not getting... you've got those layers of bureaucracy.
I was actually thinking in a pretty optimal scenario, so I was thinking like a kind of startup greenfield. It's still quite slow.
Yeah.
And that's the reason for the saying, which I don't know if someone else has said it, but the best line of code is the line of code not written.
Yeah.
Which is still very much true, because as soon as you write one of those lines of code, things start going wrong. You've got to support it. It's just a nightmare. And
as a related point is simple code as well, right?
Yeah.
It's the number of times you see some overly complicated code and you're like, well, yeah, okay, it might save you whatever. There's some benefit for doing it, but let's just keep it simple, stupid, and then we'll, at the point where it becomes an issue, then we optimize to the nth degree. But the simpler it is, fewer lines of code, easier to understand, easy to maintain.
Yeah.
Is going to get you, going to keep you productive.
Yeah, software is a less is more game for sure. But with the requirements stuff, it's kind of a case of, if you have good requirements, then the developers are going to waste less time. The way I think about it is if you're going to iterate, so that you ask the developers to build a thing and then they go and build that, if you call that A, and then you're going to look at that and say, oh, that wasn't quite what I wanted. And then they're going to build some more stuff to make the customer happy, and that's B. If you can get it more, you're never going to get it perfectly right, and it depends on the type of product. So for example, when they were building like Instagram or Twitter, they didn't really know what people wanted. So there's an element of feedback of like, we'll build the thing and then we'll see how everyone reacts. And it's not like you say, well, they actually iterated on it 30 times, so they did a bad job with the requirements. It's kind of like they were doing lots of experiments, getting feedback. But in a lot of enterprise scenarios, that's totally not the case.
No.
It's kind of like...
They know exactly what they want.
Yeah, someone somewhere pretty much knows what they want.
Yeah.
And there may be a few unknowns that once you... There's a human element of like, once something's in front of you, you think, oh, and you actually have to use it. It's hard to like model the real world in your mind 100% so you go, I definitely know what I want. And I don't...
Yeah, and having known everything about the problem, right? Yeah, you can never be in that position.
And you can't blame people for like occasionally making a few mistakes, but I see a lot of scenarios where it's not that, it's like they just didn't think about like really common things. So like the kind of thing I'll see is I'll have a client come to me and they'll want a consumer facing app, and I'll say, there'll be the customer at some point will make an order, and I'll say, what if the payment fails, or what if they can they cancel it later? And they'll go, oh yeah, I guess they could cancel it later. And then you're like, well, that's going to add quite a considerable amount of time to the thing we were building, because now we've got all these different error states that an order can go through or something. And
we've got to refund and all that stuff. And
refunds. And then all of a sudden it's like, you've opened this big can of worms, and sometimes it needs to be done. But yeah, I think a lot of the reason that I got really into this is because I started doing more work. I spent the first 6 or 9, like the first 2/3 of my career where either by being employed permanently or on a contract, I was paid per hour of my time. And then it switched to people sometimes asking me, could you build this project for us? And we've got, $20,000 or something. Can you build this thing? And then the requirements become a lot more important when you're going to put your money where your mouth is. If somebody has crappy requirements and they're going to pay you by the hour, sometimes you're like, man, these requirements aren't very good. And you can say to them, they're not very good. And they'll go, no, they're fine. What else do you need? Blah, 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 all the stuff you hear.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, it's your funeral, off we go. And then it takes triple what they were thinking. But with fixed cost, it's like, I need to commit to a price to deliver this thing.
Yeah.
And it's really dangerous for your business if you get that wrong. And it got to a point where I just wouldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
It's that hard.
It's so hard.
Yeah, because you end up with like the goalpost moving, because actually what a business person has in mind is like success. So often it will be like, I've launched my app and customers are using it and they're not complaining loads. That will be actually their mental milestone.
Yeah.
But then they'll write requirements for the app. And the requirements they've written, you could deliver them 100%, but they won't satisfy that original statement of like, all my users are, saying this is really good. So then you end up in these, weird scenarios where they're kind of unhappy with the work you've done, even though you've done exactly what you said you would do.
So in that example there, what would they be unhappy about? Is it that it just wasn't what they pictured, like almost the way it looks, or
it's kind of like maybe it's easier with the enterprise. It will be exactly what they said, but it's like,
but that's not what they wanted.
That's not what they wanted. What people usually want is an outcome. So they'll be like, in a big company, it'll be like, I want my operations team to be able to handle support queries on their own or something, and they'll define some software that they think does that. Yeah, you implement it with 100% of what they said, but it actually turns out that it doesn't do that.
Yeah.
And they don't give to, if they don't care if it's what they asked for. They might, if they're a good customer, depending, and especially internally in companies, people just accept it that maybe they don't realize that it was their fault. But when it's money and you're handing over money and someone said, oh, it's 20,000, you've told someone it's $20,000 to build this thing, and it doesn't solve the problem that they were paying the $20,000 for, then you get a lot of friction. And it's
so actually an issue. I guess an issue there then is not the lack of requirements, but it's receiving a set of requirements that haven't been sort of validated.
Yes. Or another thing that can happen is the requirements are unclear, so you don't know when you're finished, which is ridiculously dangerous if you're exchanging money.
Yeah, because it feels like that in that previous example, somebody's gone, I want to do this thing. I want my customers to be happy using my product. They've then, them as a non-technical person, perhaps have tried to translate those into functional requirements that you can do.
Yeah.
But in that translation, they've then lost some information.
Yes.
And I suppose that's then why, coming back to my earlier discussion, why you're trying to have people who specialise in doing that translation, which is business outcome to requirement.
Yeah.
And I suppose but obviously in a small company, it's, a guy who's just founded his own company, he's on his own, or a couple of other people. That's not going to happen. So they're then trying to, with no experience, do that translation and failing, I assume is what's happening.
Basically. And also it will end up costing them more, because even if you're doing it on a day rate and they get the requirements wrong, like I said before, you'll do the first iteration, which is A, then you tweak it because they got it wrong, which is B, but you may be changing things you already did.
Yeah.
So it's not like, if the total effort should have been 100 days, if you do that over 3 iterations because the requirements were naff, it might take like 120, 140. The problem is as well, changing things and rewriting things can be really expensive, and developer time is like really expensive. $100,000 over, however many working days there are in a year. It's a lot of dollars a day. So even one day is often hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So it's kind of like, if you can shave off a week, that's a big, basically in software, there's really only money. There's like,
and time to market.
Yeah. Money, time. There's a few other, what's the iron triangle? What's the other thing? I've forgotten.
I don't know. I haven't heard the phrase the iron triangle.
It's like the 3 things in software that if you take it from one,
quality is the other one, isn't it?
Yeah. Quality
it can be quick and accurate, but not be well written. And those, it's like those 3 sentences, isn't it?
Money and time in most scenarios, in my experience, are basically kind of the same thing. Not always. Not
for the business. They're not, right.
If you're talking about a single developer, so if you think of the problem as being almost single-threaded, you've got a single developer working on a project, then money and time are pretty much proportional in that scenario. If you've got 2 developers working simultaneously, then money and time, well, if you can add more developers, then money and time can become decoupled.
It's a different problem though then, isn't it?
Yeah. Then you get into other problems.
So it sounds like to me then that the potential issue, I'm trying to think how I did this in the startup, but for me the overriding solution to this is having very, very short life cycles between somebody saying let's solve this problem, and then trying to show them something that even is on the way to solving that problem, and then you can quickly divert and change course.
Less is definitely more. I completely agree.
So I guess the thing I would, if you're just given a set of requirements, that actually sounds worse than saying, I don't have any. Because at least then you can be like, right, well, first thing we need to do is people need to register or something. And then you can be like, well, let's build the registration screen. You can do it that way maybe, rather than just saying, I want an app that does all of these things.
Do it bit by bit.
Yeah. And then having, it's the agile versus waterfall design model to some degree.
Yeah.
And in a very small organization, if you're sat, hopefully you're sat close either with if it's something like a founder, you can have that quick cycle. Like when it was me and the boss of my startup, obviously we're in the same office, we were sat together, so you could see, if you had any questions about it, it wouldn't be an email to a BA to somebody else about what's this what do you think about this. It would just be, come and have a look over my shoulder, this is what I'm thinking, does that work? And it, to be fair, the most efficient I've ever felt was in that startup. Where we would have a discussion about the next feature that we wanted to work on. We'd start working on it straight away and having that feedback loop the entire time, which it feels good. I actually think it feels rewarding to do it that way. You don't feel like you're saying wasting effort, having to ditch a load of stuff. You could have spent a week working on a piece of functionality that you're like, I'm really proud of this now, and it works really well.
Realistically, in real life, to put something into production, a week is like no time at all. A week's like nothing.
No, I was thinking just in terms of, building.
Oh, yeah.
You're building a piece of functionality to say, look, this is how I think we solve requirement A. You spend your week, you show them on the Monday, they go, that's completely wrong or not right. You've got to start again.
A small requirements problem can easily blow out a week, possibly a couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
You see what I mean?
Because the description of the requirement can be simple, but the implementation could be very, very difficult.
The frustrating thing about requirements and programming in general is that, that one sentence, sometimes you'll talk to people, like we can talk about we could probably just quickly talk about the requirements for a system that would take like 3 years to build. It's crazy in like a paragraph.
Have I told? I can't remember. I've definitely told you this before, but I can't remember if I mentioned it on the podcast or not. Apologies if I have. But there's that sketch or little comic strip where it's like, business person comes to the application developer, it's like, right, I want an application to be able to take pictures of, when you're in the zoo or something, I want to be able to take pictures. You go, yeah, fine, no problem, I can do that. They're like, oh, it'd also be really good if you could just remember, where you took that picture, just, get the GPS coordinates and just save that with the picture. Yeah. Like, yeah, no problem, another week or whatever. And then he goes, and then finally, I'd like to just you be able to tell me what animal is in that picture that you've taken. And then you're like, well, that's like a 3-year PhD.
That's quite hard, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So it's like, but to the business person, they're like, well, you could tell me exactly where in the world you are, but why can't you tell me what the animal is?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. GPS is pretty immense, isn't it, really? Yeah, but that's like really easy. I mean, arguably that last one has sort of been solved, but it totally...
Well, this is it was quite an old comic, but now you'd be less worried. But still, of those three things, right, the one that would scare you the most would be that third one, right?
If you're truly non-technical, it's hard to correlate between like a thing you're asking for and how long that might take technically. Like if you say, I want you to write a program that can beat a grandmaster at chess, maybe most people go, that sounds quite hard. But they're like, is that picture a monkey? A 5-year-old can tell you that. So it's kind of like, it's not exactly a grandmaster in chess, but 10 years ago that would have basically been impossible. Maybe now it's more doable, but it's kind of...
Yeah, I guess it's that thing of, as a non-technical person, you're thinking about solving requirements the way, like things you think might be easy to solve, you're thinking from a human point of view, right? Like in that example there, you're saying, well, it's really easy to tell what each object is as a human. Yeah. But then mapping it to, well, how do you program that? That's obviously a problem that isn't actually yet solved.
But if you're non-technical, I mean, what else do you have as a baseline? Like
I completely agree.
And maybe like people that are slightly more technical but not programmers, they might be a bit of a dab hand in Excel. But then some things that are really hard in Excel are really easy in programming. I mean, in general, programming does make reasonably light work to most Excel things.
Yeah.
But like some things that are really difficult in Excel are not that difficult in programming at all.
Well, for that specific example, I always think back to your story that you had when you worked as an intern, where I think the team you were working on was a core team, and they were trying to replicate a pivot table feature for .NET.
SQL.
Go on.
So they wanted to write like a query language which was similar to SQL, but in C#, using for those of you that are familiar with C#, using sort of like a link, like a fluid API where you could say like .select, where they wanted something to do with that. Oh, and they wanted users to be able to do it. That was it. Yeah. In a UI. Yeah.
So it'd be basically like a pivot table.
Yeah.
And from what I remember you saying, that was a very, very, very difficult task.
Yeah, that was hard.
But the users are like, but Excel can do it.
Yeah. And they're kind of like, they kind of wanted, they were like semi-technical users, and they wanted like traders and people to be able to write kind of like queries in C# in the middle of the application on a desktop. But like doesn't sound that hard, but then it gets like really difficult.
Yeah, and that's the one I think that you can even be, like you say, slightly technical, understand Excel to a low level, and be like, well, let's just have this functionality and put it in our app, and you're like, well, actually,
it is pretty mad. I think the longer I've gone on programming, the more I've come to realise that requirements are actually right at the core of what programming is. And like you said, if you have BAs or business people that understand requirements, that's very valuable. Or maybe they understand the requirements, but they also have a better understanding than average of
technology,
what might be easy or hard or impossible. And a lot of programmers that you see go into project management, the reason that they're good at that is because they might not be able to write much code anymore, but they still have that sense of, like, my first boss at work was very good at that. He didn't really code much at that. I've heard he's gone back now. I had a beer with him. He told me he's gone back. Don't know how true that is if he's listening, but hopefully it's true.
Seen the light.
Seen the light. He went into the darkness and then came back out. But he was very effective because he may not have been able to write all the lines of code as quickly as some of the people that work for him, but he could look at something and go, the way that this system's engineered, that's going to be really difficult, or that's just a really hard problem in general, like with the state of the art of the technology we have in whatever year we're in. So, and then for programmers, I think it's also true. So it's true for like people that understand the requirements, but programmers that can understand what the problem that their customer, so that might be like what the business wants, but it may be if you're working, for like a charity. It's like what outcome does someone want to happen?
Yeah, and I think if you're in that bigger organisation, the developer who sat there looking at these requirements has highly likely not had that conversation with the business, so they don't necessarily see the big picture of what we're trying to solve, right? So you go, I'm developing this requirement. I'm like, I have no context. Like, why? Why am I doing this? What is this going to help?
And that's why a bullet pointed or like a numbered list of requirements. You might get a 30-page Word document. They might have spent months on the requirements, but if the developer does not have that context, the reality is the requirements will never cover everything. And so you get to make, as a programmer, you get to make decisions.
Yeah.
Little decisions. And you're thinking, I'm doing this for Dave in accounting. And this edge case has come up. And if you've had a bunch of conversations, you'll think, I know how that works and how they do that. So I'll probably just do this and that'll probably be fine. And you may ask Dave, or you may just make a decision on his behalf. Yeah. But if you've just been given a document, you could go miles down the wrong route, and then you show it to them, and they're like, "That is never going to work," because
it's like that's just completely wrong. And again, that's part of that developer knowing the end user. So in that example there, right, if you've spoken to Dave in accounting, he knows who you are. It's a lot easier just to fire off an email and say, "Look, Dave, if this number's -1, what do you want me to do? Yeah, I think we should do this." Yeah, and he'll either be like, "Yeah," or he'll be like, "No, let's do that." And then you've learned something else about the system directly from the person who's going to use it, and you're gaining that knowledge all the time by communicating directly with the business person that wants this thing. Yeah, that you're going to never get indirectly through somebody else, because that information is going to be lost in being passed down. Right? It's like a UDP connection from the business to you.
Lossy.
It's lossy, yeah.
I think the one thing I should say is that you and I come with quite a particular, because not only are we programmers and possibly programmers, we're also...
Not that again.
We're a particular type of programmer. I think, even though we have our differences, you like lower level than me, we are both what I would call application developers. So we tend to build software for maybe technical people, but often non-technical people that want an outcome. We don't, for example, work on the Linux kernel, which does have requirements, but their requirements must be coming more from technical people like us, being like, or maybe even more technical people than us. They're like 2 levels below us.
Yeah, they're low. Yeah,
they're really low down, like in the kind of like the levels of abstraction. But and
what's the difference there then?
Well, I guess the ability to talk to people and understand business stuff is perhaps the types of domains we work in are often non-technical domains. So it will be like, for you, it'll often be finance with the stuff you're working now and data capture, and you need to understand, market data and where it's coming from exchanges in the financial markets. And for me, it will be like, I want this app and I want my customers to be able to pay money. And so I've got to kind of think about those sorts of things. But for them, it's more like other developers. And then maybe these skills are slightly, the requirements side of things it's probably important wherever you are, but maybe the domain might still be technical if you're working on a thing where your customer is also technical, which might mean, because I think, to be honest with you, where we've done, I'm hoping we've done okay in our careers. I think you've done well in your career, and we'll figure out.
I don't know how you decided that, but
no, it's easier to see with someone else. But I think the thing that makes it's easier if I talk about you. But the thing that makes you a good developer is that you're good at this stuff. And I would say, the saying I would normally use is it's a developer without the socks and sandals, because in order to do this well, you need to be able to go out and talk to people and have a normal conversation with them, which is almost just based entirely on common sense. And you need to be able to. What's super interesting about this is that when I taught people to program, they start off and they know nothing. So you could blind them with science by saying, I'm going to call a function, and they'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and you could draw out some code and they'd be like, that's just like a foreign language to me. And then 3 months later or 6 months later, they gain a level of technical competency, and they've forgotten themselves from 6 months ago that doesn't understand anything. They'll start talking to users, and they're blinding them with coding science. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, 6 months ago, you didn't know what any of this meant. Yeah. And now you seem to have lost all empathy for this other person who also doesn't know what any of this means. And of course they don't, because you didn't. Yeah. But I think what what both of us have a bit of a knack for is like we have to some degree not forgotten. And I think that empathy with other people.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting point.
It helps. It really helps because otherwise, I've met a lot of developers who are really good. They can like crunch it out, but they couldn't go and speak to Dave from accounting and really understand their problems. And that
is something I think we're very. I would, obviously biased here because we're talking about each other. But yeah, I agree that if I'm imagining that we're in a team of say 10, and I was like, right, somebody here needs to go and talk to Dave from accounting to understand the lowdown. Yeah, I mean, I would someone like yourself.
Yeah,
because I know that you're going to have you're going to have a conversation with him where you understand that he's non-technical.
Yes,
and appreciate that rather than sort of I definitely have had managers that have struggled with that. They get frustrated or not angry, but get frustrated or denigrate that person or the BA equivalent because they're not technical enough.
Yeah,
without necessarily taking a step back and understanding that they can't really know that much about it because they might.
It's not there.
They're not technical. I mean, they might, and then there's then whether they don't know enough technically, but they know a lot about the actual application.
Yeah,
what they can do.
Which normally these people.
Yeah, but it's even then. It's still. Yeah, that's a very good point. I hadn't really thought of it like that. It was not getting frustrated with people not understanding what you're working in, perhaps. Yeah. And trying to help them understand better is part of it as well.
And knowing what they don't know. And I wouldn't say I'm high up on the empathy list. Like empathy's not high up on my qualities, but I always think of my mother, actually. Yeah. It's my tactic. I just think with my mum, would she just be, because, obviously she's not a programmer. If I talk about what I work on to her, with her, she won't have a clue what I'm talking about. And I often just use that to think, if I'm speaking to Dave from accounting, what does he know? And what's really hard is when you interact with a new person, trying to figure out where they're at, because you will have some people who are a little bit technical, or like you say, they've worked with that system, especially in my first job. They've used the system that you're working on for 5 years, and they know the ins and outs of the functionality better than you do, because they sit there clicking on it every day, and you've only worked on a few parts. And when you chat to them, you're kind of like, oh, they actually do know a lot of stuff, but they don't know some things. And it's like building a mental model of the other person. But it's hard when you're starting, because then you're like, do I go in and treat them like an idiot? Like that's bad. You don't want to treat them like an idiot. So you have to but you also have to assume that it's safer to err on the side that they don't know.
Yeah, and then just be pleasantly surprised.
If they do know, but then not patronise them or make them feel like an idiot.
Yeah.
And it's a real skill to like...
Another good example of that is, I've found, is when the business people, say it's generally in finance, there's a lot of equations that are solving these problems or providing the answers that they're interested in. They obviously know the mathematical equation and how to work this out like the back of their hand, like middle office or something. They're like, you calculate exposure like this, bang. And I'm like, okay. So I think I have that function over here. But, I don't actually, because I'm not,
no.
Obviously up to the point I can write the code to translate it, but I'm like, well, I'm not the one really to validate that, because I don't have that. It's that sort of bridging again where, particularly in finance and mathematical equations like that, you get the business and the technology there are very, very close, because they've defined exactly the function they want or the equation they want, and you're just basically trying to implement that and not screw it up. So that's another example, I think, where you've got somebody who isn't very technical but knows a lot more about what you're doing than you do to some degree. Anyway, so that was just another aside.
That I would call the word I use. I think it is the standard word, but I heard someone horribly misuse it recently, which made me doubt whether I know what it means. But the word I use is domain, which is like
domain knowledge.
Yeah, or domain knowledge, or like which I think of. There's lots of like formal stuff, but I'm not that way minded. But it's like the nouns and verbs that you use to describe like the problem space. So in finance, it might be like those formulas, and the nouns might be trades and or like some sort of like prices and market data and that sort of stuff.
Buying, selling of verbs, those sort of things, right?
What's interesting with finance, which in London, I mean, we have harped on about this quite a lot. I think it's the same in New York as well, for those of you who are US based, but most developers in London that are at the top end of the pay bracket tend to work in financial services stuff. And it's interesting when you were saying that, I realised that part of the problem there is, if you're working on like an Instagram app, clone or whatever, or Reddit, as a developer, you can almost fully understand the domain. But with a lot of finance things, you actually get into a territory where learning the domain is quite a big barrier to entry for you as a developer. So you actually end up with problems on both sides. Like the customer might not understand all the tech stuff, which is quite common.
Yeah.
And then you don't understand all of their stuff. So then you've got to somehow meet in the middle where they somehow teach you. That's much harder because they can get away without understanding your stuff. But you, to some degree,
need to know it.
You need to know their stuff because you can't, like in your example, if they have a function that does a thing, or they have a mathematical formula that does a thing and they want your code to do it, you can't just like skim over, it doesn't, like you can't like approximate that. It needs to do it. You need to at least understand for 20 minutes how that works, and then you can forget it again once you've written your function. But it's...
Well, one thing I did want to, just a related point to your saying about the guys you trained up losing that empathy, being a different person.
They sometimes get it back again.
Oh, okay.
But go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I'm listening to Hello Internet, but very, very old episodes, and they were talking about CGP Grey had written a article about you not being the same person you were in the past. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I do remember.
Yeah, and it just made me think of that, where you sort of assume that you've been the same person from now backwards. You assume you've always been the same, but actually you've changed a lot, and that would be an example there, right, where they didn't realise that they didn't, they've all temporarily forgotten that they didn't know anything, and they felt frustrated about watching you, and then it's sort of followed on. And
it's weird. It's really weird to watch people do that thing, though. I think I gave them a suitably hard time about it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, dude, 3 months ago you knew. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. And the thing is as well, it's not like an isolated case. I'd say it affected, at least I saw it, quite clear cases in nearly everybody that I taught. Like some are better than others at it, for sure. It seems to be a person by person thing, and I don't think it's just related to software. I think it can be, like you said, like when you're talking to a finance person in middle office and they're telling you about some mathematical formula. Well, perhaps if they're talking, depending on who they're talking to, they should understand that person won't have a clue what the hell they're going on about, because financial markets are quite a complicated thing to understand in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so hard to understand the technology, because the vastness of knowledge that it takes to become a programmer, especially now. But there's so much prerequisite knowledge before you can even have a sensible conversation. And when I was teaching people to code, most of it was just cramming in, like, you just sort of need to know that all these things exist. You need to understand that there's this thing called HTTP, and that there are APIs that often look like this. And it's not even everything that like you or I would know, but you can't have a sensible conversation with someone until they kind of have the prerequisites covered.
That base level, right?
And that base is daunting. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. The last 2 places I've worked at have been situations where I haven't had to deal with those sort of formal requirements.
Yeah.
So I don't remember the horror so much because it's not been as recent. Like I say, in my startup, it was that very, very quick cycle of requirement.
Quite informal, I'm guessing.
Yeah, very informal. Yeah, it was just a conversation, and we were using Jira to just track the things that we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Nothing more than that. The current place, different problems, but it was me doing the majority of the BA, talking to the business. Like, I actually sit next to the business now because it's just easier to have that conversation right there and then with them.
Is that why you get paid the big bucks?
The big dollar. Big dollar.
Because they'll struggle to hire someone with your technical ability that can also do that.
Yeah, but
they're rare. I think. They're really rare.
But that's an interesting point though. This is an FX related, so foreign exchange related business. But actually going into this, I didn't know anything about foreign exchange.
Oh, yeah.
Because previous in financial space, I'd done a lot of equities. Mm-hmm. But they obviously just, I think once you know some of it, there's a lot of it transfers over. Yeah. You know what the data looks like. You've seen, order books and things like that before. So a lot of it translates. There's other bits that I've obviously had to learn for the domain specifically, and that takes time. But it's still in that situation where I was asking the business and me are having direct conversation with what they want, and me trying to translate that into something I can actually sit down and develop.
The thing is with this that I really want to hammer home on is you sitting down and figuring out like translating it is an extremely like leveraged task. If you get that, if you nail that, you'll probably shave a lot of time and therefore money off of how long it takes you to build the thing. And if you get it wrong, you won't have satisfied the thing that they wanted, which is bad because then basically you've just not succeeded, or it will take you a lot longer because you'll have to go through multiple iterations when they go, that wasn't what we wanted. And so that's why I think it deserves, I feel like a bit of a hypocrite because I'm like, it deserves a lot of care and attention because you can save a lot of developer time and developer time, like programming's quite a slow activity.
Yeah.
Maybe some people will disagree with me on that, but I really do think it is. If I asked you to like Excel is compared for all its sins, and obviously most programmers sort of have to hate Excel in a way, but but like it's quite efficient in terms of like you think I want to do this, and then you sit and do it in Excel, and it's normally done quite quickly. But programming quite often, how many days are you? Sometimes you do something in code and it's knocked out in like half a day. So you start the day and you maybe get 2 things done. But how many times is it like day 4 of basically building the same feature, even if you're really good or you work in a really efficient environment? So I think...
But you see, yeah, so that's for me where I feel that having that, being in charge of the platform that I work on, is I've developed the environment to make it efficient to make those sort of changes.
Yes.
I thought about efficiency as a primary driver to the design of the application, because I think without that, I've worked before in places where the system hasn't really been designed to that level. It's just been sort of built up basically as and when requirements have come in.
Ad hoc. It needs to do this.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're thinking about, you're understanding their overall sort of profile of what it is their job is, what sorts of things they might want to do, and then you're thinking about future probabilities of requirements that might be sensible for them to ask for, and then you're factoring that into when you're writing the software.
And what I would say to that though is, because I'm using KDB, that space of potential is reduced. Like I think if you said to do it with like Java, you could do. There's absolutely anything you could do.
Yeah,
with Java.
yeah.
I think with KDB, there's a narrower set of stuff that you're going to see want to ever be done.
Yeah.
So I feel like I know, 90% of what that list would be, so I can factor that stuff that I'm aware of into my design.
Yeah.
That's a benefit of using sort of a niche technology to that degree. It's very good at doing certain things, and at any point where somebody was like, "Oh, I want to do this other thing, like string processing or something like that," I would be like, well, KDB isn't the right language for that, so let's solve that in a different way. Whereas if you're building a Java platform, someone was like, well, now let's add string processing. You're like, well, yeah, we can stick it over here, but
yeah, that's true.
That's I'm going to prefix that because the technology that I'm using helps with that design process.
Yeah, because you're basically cutting down the problem space of what that module of software might have to solve. Yeah, because it can get silly for certain things. I think you can still do it quite effectively though if you are just using a general purpose programming language, because you speak to them and they'll talk about aspirations they have in the future. They'll say, "Oh, one day it'll be really cool."
Yeah,
like we worked on a project that was like it's an app where you can get your car washed and someone comes and they wash your car. So it's like a gig economy, Deliveroo, Uber style kind of app. And a really obvious, there are maybe a list of 10 features that I know that the founder wants one day. So when you're building it, I know he wants to make his matching engine much better, or he wants to, send money directly to the washers in real time when the transactions happen. There's like all these things that we weren't able to do with the time we had to build the first version. But as you're building it, you're thinking, oh, he might want that.
Yeah.
But how can I build this so that it's easily extendable?
Yeah.
But it's a difficult trade-off because there's an infinite number of things that someone could ask for. It's kind of unpredictable. You're only assigning probabilities. And there's that trade-off that people have talked about a lot, like people that write about software, of overgeneralizing, then makes your code more complicated, takes longer.
Yeah.
So you kind of need to build the software for what it needs to do today, but you've got one eye on all these probabilities of things that might happen in the future. And that's why it's hard. And hopefully the robots won't get us, is because it involves speaking to humans. And to be really good at, you can be rubbish and not speak to humans and not be good at that. I think it's a it depends what kind of environment you work in. As you get more senior, like you're running a platform, like you're in charge of it, you are going to have these kind of conversations. There's not going to be someone sitting above you saying, Jas, we need it to do this now. Here's a 4-page requirements document. It's kind of...
That's true. Talking about thinking about the future, there's a startup that I know a guy that works there, and they've decided to use the blockchain as part of their data storage.
Yeah.
And the first thing I said to him was like, why the hell are you using the blockchain?
It's got to be your first question with anything like that.
I was like, it's such a buzzword. It doesn't make it, initially it doesn't make any sense. The startup is to do with offering mortgages. And I was like, why are you not just using a database? This doesn't blockchain seems massively complicated. It's going to cause you lots of problems, I think. What's the net benefit of using it? And he was like, well, one of the things I want to do is eventually we're going to open these mortgages that we offer to then be resold and have like a mortgage market. And to stop us from getting into the issue that caused the last credit crunch, i.e. mortgage-backed securities where nobody knew what the actual mortgages were. This way, because it's on a blockchain, in theory, it's completely open and transparent. And everyone that would trade with you could see on the blockchain exactly what you're offering in each product. And so that's sort of like a long-term... They've made an explicit design decision now based on something they want to implement down the line. Now that's a very extreme case because they've built their entire data storage around one feature that they might want to offer down the line. Might never get there, but I did just want to mention that as an aside, as another example of thinking about the future. Yeah, where they've taken it perhaps to a bit more of an extreme.
There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty when you're building software, and it's hard. I think good software developers are thinking about, because sometimes you just know, like that they're going to want to, there's a few things that I built a thing recently which was like a checkout for e-commerce websites, and there was stuff to do with how they wanted to format dates and things, and they asked me, they were like, this was for one particular client of theirs, they said they've asked if we can format it like this, and I'm sitting there thinking, tomorrow you could come and they could have changed their mind, or the next client you on board could want something completely different. So then when I was designing it, I thought, well, I'll have like a default implementation of how a date gets formatted, but I'll allow them to pass like a function which takes the date and then formats it. Yeah. And then in the future, if I need to change that for them, or if they're actually kind of partially they're pretty technical, they want to change it themselves,
they can just pass it in.
Yeah, they can just write another date formatter for client X that comes along. And so I'm kind of thinking like, what's the probability that, like, how fixed is this requirement? Is it like set in stone? That one, it felt like for this case, it was reasonably set in stone, but for the next case, it could change. So hard coding it, I'd then have to take it out. And it's weighing up like the cost, like the cost of me in that example, passing in a function was like nothing. I just provided a default function, which was the one they wanted. And then I'm like, but you can pass in another one. And then it just calls the function. It took like 20 seconds.
So I think again about how general do you make it, but in that example, it's a great one. Like it's always if you're having to do things separate ways for a separate client, you've always got to imagine that there could be another 10 clients that are going to also want different
things.
So then you're like, well, how do I solve this? So then each client can have a different setting.
That's a classic pattern of especially enterprise software or business to business stuff where someone asks for something and you think I could have never, like, it's just like left
it's so
field.
Specific.
It's so specific.
Yeah.
Like,
they're like, we can't support. We have to have pipes between our CSV. We can't have commas or something. Something stupid,
random. Like the next 20 are not going to ask for, and then you're like, oh.
But then someone else will be like, well, it actually has to be tab separated. And you're like, well, okay, I'm going to have a setting which is what do you want your file separated by?
Yeah. Just you can pass whatever you want. But I think there's a balance because you can make things too general. I think part of it is figuring out the things which you think might change, but also sometimes there are things that are relatively set in stone, and identifying those early. And locking in stakeholders, which is a thing that I do.
What do you mean?
So it's kind of a little bit of it's a very human tactic, and it's a bit like cover your own arse kind of thing. But sometimes I'll think, gosh, I'm going to build this in a way, and if I have to change this thing, it's going to be a disaster. Like whatever it is in the system I'm building, I'll think if they ever wanted to do this, so then I'll find the stakeholder for the project, and I'll be like, I can save a lot of time if I make this simplification. Would you ever want to change X to be like this? Because the way I'm thinking of doing it, Like, it's a lot harder. If we can make that assumption, it will save a lot of time.
Yeah.
And then I get them to say yes, and then just get it in writing. And then 6 months later, when they tell you do want to change it, you just pull it out. Just
So you've got to have that sign off, right? Because then they've made... Or they could... The right answer for them would be like, I don't understand enough about the problem.
Yeah.
Like, it feels unlikely we're going to do that. Somebody has to make that call.
I think
it should be the business making those calls.
Yeah, and I think...
Because they're paying.
A lot of this is... Yeah, they're usually indirectly or directly paying. And I think throwing things back to them... I think it's like... I think the way I think of it is like... If you think of yourself as an extension of them, which sounds weird, but like... They don't understand all this technical stuff. And you're kind of like... If you're just being really honest and like transparent, you are their technical eyes and ears. And when you come up against a decision point like that, throwing it back to them and saying, look, I'm going to do this thing. It's going to take me a week. If you needed to ever do this, we should do it now, but you're looking at a month.
Yeah.
They know that it's going to cost them 3 weeks extra. And you can have an explicit conversation about whether that's the right decision. That's good development, I think, to do.
Yeah, I agree. Because you say it's either a week if you don't want to do it, or a month now. But if you go for the week option now and you want to change it later, it's going to be 3 months. They can see, they can make an educated guess there about which way they want to go. And
in some ways, you're just asking them. I've had things in the past where I've had developers who work for me and they kind of get a bit in that scenario. They're like, but it's going to take me 3 extra weeks. And I'm like, they're not. I mean, I know you need to spend your time doing that, but they're not really your weeks. You're not paying for them. They're paying for them. So it makes sense for them to have the decision.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if they say, I want you to do this thing, and you say, well, that's going to take an extra 5 weeks because it's really complicated, then they say, but we really need it. Then it's like, well, it's just going to have to take 5 weeks, or you have to accept the compromise, or whatever it is. And I think that,
I think it's giving because the worst case in that scenario is that because that thing's taken a month, it's then delayed the delivery, and then it's a month then later or 3 weeks later than they were expecting, and then they get annoyed about it. Like, why the hell did it take so long? You're like, well, we made this decision, which was to make this generic solution for this because you might want to do this down the line. They're going to be more annoyed that you have that conversation at the end where they go, that's never, ever going to happen.
Yeah.
Whereas at the time where you're actually coming across that problem, you go, look, what's the deal? And they go, never going to be a problem. Just do the week one. You're like, well, there we go.
And sometimes you get that and you can hear in their voice, they're totally confident that thing's never going to happen, and then it never does. And you're like, fine.
And also, they at least know the risk if they change their mind down the line.
Yeah. You're giving them information that they couldn't have.
Yeah.
Because they don't understand all the technical stuff. They're probably not even they're definitely not looking at the code in this sort of, scenario at all. So
but you're right. I think describing yourself as their eyes and ears is a very good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to help them see into the application without them looking at the code, right?
I mean, this is if you're genuinely trying to do a really good job and be the best developer you can be. There might be cases where I think if you're employed by a company, there might be like politics, but generally I think that approach is fine. When you're working with a client, say on a fixed cost project, and you come across something like this, what do you do then? Because it's like, you've already agreed how much it would cost. If you didn't specify that thing in the requirements and it's just been left as an implicit assumption, and then you say, would you ever want to make this thing generic? And they say, of course I would. And you're like, that's going to add 5 weeks. And I've said it's going to cost $10,000. And that only accounted for for a bunch of development. So it's kind of...
I think that would probably, that would come down to the technicalities of the contract in that case, right? Because I think you'd be well within your rights to say, look, we can, based on the agreement, we were assuming it's going to take a week, which it will do with these provisos.
Yeah.
Or, for an extra N,000, we can do the fully fledged version.
But that's why you need ridiculously accurate requirements to do fixed cost in
That's why I think fixed cost doesn't work for anybody.
It doesn't work. It doesn't, I agree, I don't think it works.
Well, the only time it works is if the business have a very, very cost conscious to the point where they're willing to fix the cost in lieu of quality or speed. I think.
Even then, I think the thing is, even if you get a cracking deal as a business because some developer comes in and lowballs themselves, and then realise, because that's another thing as well, is with estimating. Requirements really help with estimating, solid requirements, because how can you know how long something's going to take if you don't know what you're going to build? It's impossible. By definition. If you don't know where the finish line is and what needs to be done to get there, you cannot estimate it.
No.
Fixed cost.
requires very accurate estimates.
If you're costing based on your time, which seems superficially, there are some people on the internet nets that say you shouldn't. You should cost things on the value. So like if a company gets massive value out of a problem being solved for them, like it's
charge them more.
Yeah, but I think that, I don't know, the way I always price things was how much was it going to take me plus some sort of contingency and then a margin on top. Because
I think that would be the most.
Those are the two ways.
The problem is that for the business, it means that they guarantee the amount that the application is going to cost. And I can imagine, particularly in larger organisations, that there are projects that they have to do that they don't want to spend a lot of money on. So, for example, regulatory application fixes. I can see that there will be an argument for saying, look, we have to do this by law. We want to spend as little as possible. Find some company that will agree to do it for an amount that it will never change.
So I think if you did want to do fixed cost and go through with it, which I think I've come to the conclusion, there are sometimes it maybe works where a company has technical people and they've scoped out the requirements and they're like, just build this.
Because we don't have time to do it.
Yeah, we don't have resources. But here are some APIs and like a very technical specification.
Yeah.
Just make it happen.
Yeah.
Or I think that
I've never seen that particular case, but I could see that would be useful where you're like, look, we need it and we just haven't got the spare capacity. We just need somebody to come in, do it and bugger off again.
That's one place where bigger clients for me have been better is requirements, because they tend to have specialists internally. They'll have some BAs, the quality of which varies from company to company, but they've at least got someone who is on the payroll to go, I'm going to get you a design and I'll have spoken to the customer. Yeah. And that's quite different from a small company where the founder's doing everything. Yeah. Has never built software before.
Yeah.
The reason that fixed cost normally doesn't work though is because when you're deciding what to build, they need to come up with really accurate requirements so you can really effectively cost it. They are presumably doing fixed costs because they're sensitive to price is probably the most common thing. Now, in order for you to come up with the requirements to a level where you can fixed cost them, they may be sending this project out to multiple people to quote them. I think unless they've really nailed the requirements, which is quite rare, then you need to do some exploratory work to figure out what to build, which reasonably needs to be built as well. So either you inflate the price of the project and take the risk that you will win the bid. And if you win the bid, then the project's price, but then you're not being very competitive with your competitors. Or you build them day by day and say, look, we need to spend 5 days just having a chat, understanding what it is you need to build. We need to go and hire a UX designer for a week to design this thing. But
I think you're right. You can't be like, as a provider of that service, you can't be like, I'll agree to a fixed cost contract without having done some initial maybe week or two of analysis.
But that's what happens with smaller companies is they don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, but we know what needs to be built because I've like told you over the phone. And you're like, yeah, but you don't have designs. That's the most common one. They want an app and they don't have designs. And for me, the most sensible form of requirements for an app is some designs. Like what screens are they going to be? What state can they
because
be?
That's the stuff that they'll be most pernickety about as well.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that colour. I don't like the way that button is. It's like, well, you need a design.
Yeah, you don't even have a design, let alone if I've not implemented the design you gave me. You didn't even give me one. So,
but a design is something that you can agree on well before the developer's even starting, and then the developer can just focus on the actual functionality rather than, can you move that button down?
Yeah, but the number of times they don't have that.
But I think I would. I mean, if I was in that situation, I would just not agree to a fixed cost.
It's not worked out for me in almost any scenario. The only way I could make it work was to charge too much.
So then you can do that as part of the delivery.
Yeah, and then so charge too much, and then because also things go wrong. So when you're really going to get held to your estimates the thing that's good about it is you're putting your money where your mouth is on your estimates, and it makes you get very real about your estimation in a way that I've not experienced. Because often you're like, yeah, that'll be fine. When it's like...
Yeah, because you're like, if it overruns, it overruns.
It overruns. It's someone else's cost. The model is the cost is on them.
Yeah.
When the cost's on you, all of a sudden you're like, that could go terrible. I know that library's unreliable. All of a sudden you're like, you become like this sort of nervous wreck of like everything. And then someone's going through all the estimates with you, and they'll be like, you said 2 weeks for this. And you're like, wow. What if this goes wrong?
But that comes back to the requirement sounding simple from a sentence or a part, a human point of view, but actually underneath being very, very complicated.
They often do, and I think it's a weird thing about, I don't know if it's like the universe or what it is, but that is just a true thing. You can, these things sound simple.
You can describe a feature very, very terse, very compactly in a few words, but that actually translates to weeks of effort.
Yeah. Or there's nuance where you can ask one question and the whole thing falls apart, and then it becomes like 3 paragraphs of like, if this happens, and you're like, oh God, never saw this coming.
Yeah.
But so I think requirements are just very important.
I think it's a really interesting discussion, actually. Again, it's one of these ones that when we started, I thought it wouldn't be that much to say, but there's actually a lot of nuance, like you said, to it, and it's really hard to. I mean, it's nigh on impossible to get right, but you've got to. I think as a developer, being aware that it's going to be that they're fluid, never taking them as sort of gospel.
Yeah,
I think is a great starting point. Assume they're going to change. Ask questions about them.
Not bite off too much, which you said.
Yeah.
So try and, if you're going to do requirements, maybe don't scope 6 months worth of work. Scope 1 month or 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, and do it in the agile way. In requirements way makes sense, right? Like a week sprint or 2 week sprint, like that. In 2 weeks' time, what can we deliver?
Yeah.
And I think, and keeping that cycle as short as possible will mean that you're not going to have that issue, like you said, where you're going to get rid of having to throw away or redesign loads of work.
I guess someone has to make sure all those chunks add up. But
now in a small company, all of these roles might be the same person, but I think if you have those sort of distinct things that you want to do, distinct tasks, so you've got somebody who needs to make sure that at the higher level it's all coming together, that can be a non-technical person.
Yeah.
You can be like, look, I'm going to focus on speccing out what we're going to deliver this week, and then turfing over to, say, the founder or the CEO, look, can you keep an eye on the fact that it's generally going in the right direction, because he knows what he wants. So I feel like you can spread the load a bit more rather than just going away for a month and coming back and delivering something underwhelming.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we're done.
Yeah.
All right.
Exit 0.